This was Exposure Radio, and it was hard work. Really hard work. Although at the beginning of the year it was a far-off, really intimidating event on the horizon, we had geared up to focus on a 3-week period. However, it was the run-up to actually broadcasting that shaped the station. My role in this varied from contributing in group decisions to working on my own. The first step of broadcasting anything is to decide who you're broadcasting to, and so market research was our first priority. Being situated in the University of Glamorgan, we were always going to have an appeal to people associated with the atrium, so we made sure to include this when it came to learning about our audience. We split into teams to learn more about what people like to hear on the radio, inside the atrium, and on the streets of Cardiff. Megan, Evie and I went to Queen Street and asked a series of questions regarding genres, decades, and how much chart music people enjoy. The results featured a surprising public preference for the 80s and almost a distaste for chart music. Based on lectures from different guest speakers in class this year, this made a lot of sense. It's really easy to assume that the listener wants to be introduced to new music, but really it's the songs they know and can sing along to that work. The way I see it, a radio station and its programming should serve almost as a friend, and a good friend at that. A friend you could listen to for hours and with the same taste in music as you. And put simply, you don't want to be friends with someone who'll put on a CD of music you've never heard of. It's angry and confusing. What you want is a friend who'll put on a CD you know and you love. Research we did meant that the people in charge of playlisting could tailor the music policy through the results we'd had. Whilst we had to include a wide range of genres, we could focus on playing more 80s hits per every hour of broadcasting. By this point we'd made the decision of a target audience of everyone involved in the university, which is an age range of 18 to 60. However, we were adamant that this should not render Exposure a student station, at least not entirely one. In this sense, our main competitor was the Atrium's own student-run station Tequila Radio, although simply in the presence of planning, scripting and properly preparing shows, I think we were inevitably going to sound more polished. The inclusion of student work was an important part of Exposure that I was very keen to include, as it covered 3 separate factions of our potential audience. The students who had made the work, their friends and others on their degree, as it gave them a taste of the work others had done and potentially the work they might be expected to do in the future, as well as giving students from all 3 campuses the chance to learn more about their university. Secondly, the Glamorgan staff, as it gave them a chance to experience the work their pupils and their colleagues had led in other areas. And finally, potential students who had the opportunity through this project to listen and hear how much those involved had developed in their time at university. In this way, the station almost served like an advertisement for us. The aspect of pre-broadcast management I was most involved in was marketing. My main role here was to design the Exposure poster campaign, being that I'd done work with graphic design and Photoshop in the past. I'd pushed the idea that Exposure needed a strong physical presence in the atrium in the weeks leading up to our first broadcast, in order to attempt to establish a listenership before we'd even begun. As such, the posters I created could be seen in the week prior to broadcast on the atrium's television screens, as well as physical copies all over the building. However, like I said, the posters only went up in the week before we went on air, which was possibly not enough time to create a general awareness. Were we to repeat the coverage, I would have liked to directly market it towards the Glintaff and Treforest campuses. Over the course of the project, we were repeatedly informed that students we'd approached had no awareness of who we were and what we were doing. Looking back, we could have held some events in the campus SUs, and if the station had a budget, then creating promotional items could also have been a possibility. But as it was, simply being there with a banner and talking to people might have sufficed, and maybe promoting a mailing list for our social media outlets too. But onto the posters themselves. I did my best to only think of Exposure Radio as a brand for this role. It was something to inform as many people as possible about, and in order to encapsulate the dual audience, students and staff, I wanted to display 2 different sides, the branding, spirit side of it, and the more realistic style. And as such, I created 2 different styles of poster, each with different examples. One displayed some slightly aged images of a girl in a field with a boombox, including the most popular amongst the group that just showed a radio being thrown into the air. Like I say, these were all following a sense of branding. They were intended to be cool and modern, and appeal to the viewer in a sense that if they like the image, they'll presumably like the station. However, the other set of posters I made using photographs taken of Becca and Anwen in the studio. I wanted to show a more realistic depiction of our station to encapsulate the fact that this was a real entity and an academic project. It's all very well to chuck imagery at people, but after the decision was made to ensure exposure was more journalistic compared to last year, I wanted to show that we were made up of people and stories, and photographs of the studio in use seemed more reflective of this. There was also a deliberate juxtaposition between seeing the studio in the poster and actually listening to the station. The two don't match. The desired effect of the poster was to make the viewer wonder what the presenters were talking about. It's this curiosity that would perhaps lead them to tuning in. After that, it was up to the content to keep them hooked. The other aspect of the posters I made sure to include was a space to write on, to ensure that the posters could be easily updated and reposted as the 3 weeks went on to keep it feeling current. Although this didn't happen, it was largely due to the nature of our station. Working with a small group of students compared to the numbers of a commercial or indeed community station in our local area, we had a disadvantage. Radio Cardiff has around 70 volunteers, GTFM has 45, and we had 20 major radio master's students together. Repeating the project, I would have liked to have put forth the idea of including a marketing or business student from Treforest to take charge of this during the 3 weeks. The new role would include working closely with the interactive journalism students to ensure the website supported what was being advertised. Next year, it would almost certainly be a good idea to work more closely with other campuses' students, as people involved are the best advertisement for a project like this. They get their friends and family to listen, and they'll spread the word about the station with posters and whatnot. It would obviously be a factor as to how many Atrium students and staff are involved, as there's a limit to what can reasonably be coordinated. But including other courses, even outside academia, just as an experience, would be a step to improving the overall quality of the station, as well as the academic possibilities in terms of trying and succeeding to reach a wider audience. However, looking back, it's something I wish I'd considered earlier in the year. Even if we didn't do anything official, I could have at least used Facebook and Twitter to try and stir up some support in other areas. When it came to making programmes, the process started with coming up with hypothetical shows for our white network. To do this, we split into groups to come up with a quick presentation featuring ideas for shows. The main idea I came up with was OS Tuesdays, a show that would have included listening to a series of songs from movie soundtracks as well as news and content based around movies and the entertainment industry. The show was, in my opinion at least, a good example of what became our specialist music show. Not so much in the sense that it was this show, but we came up with a treatment that would allow for an original one-off show just like this. The slot featured a massive range of programmes, including a similar soundtrack show that Jamie Pritchard produced and I presented. It brought me to the conclusion that this was a show that needed to be tailored to the presenter in terms of taste, and if I wasn't enthusiastic about movies, and especially movie soundtracks, it wouldn't have worked. This could also be quickly learned from a listen to our local competitor, Radio Cardiff. Based on volunteerism, all the shows are presented by people with a genuine passion for the style of music, and it really shows.
Any kind of when we think that's going to happen, sorry?
Beginning of February, the same as everything else. This is what I'm looking to push it out.
So we've got to give him a mention. Looking in the background, we got Yagster Man. He's back on the road. What's going on, brother? Everything cool, yeah?
This enthusiasm is something we worked hard to instill in our output. Station management is something we all had to consider when producing any show. Not even producing, in fact. Whilst assistant producing with Tony on the stories behind the songs featuring the Lord Mayor, I found a good example of this. I became involved at a later stage when a draft script was largely finished. However, I felt the script wasn't taking into consideration the students in our audience, and thus I changed it. Only where I felt it was necessary, of course, which was often as simple as asking what his roles are as Lord Mayor. I also briefed Meg, the presenter of the show, into getting the right tone. It had to be relaxed, but still slightly formal. Formal enough at least to appeal to the older audience, but relaxed to the point where students, including those with less of an interest in politics, could enjoy listening. I was really pleased with the result, and I feel that I helped steer the programme in a positive direction based on our station ethos.
So, Lord Mayor, you're still stranded on that dreaded atrium 4th floor, but you're going to need more than just songs. What would be the one book that you would want to have with you?
I've thought a great deal about this, and of course there's an infinite number of books, and therefore that makes it a difficult choice.
Realistically, however, the biggest influence any of us will have had on the station is the shows themselves. More than anything else, it is surely the content that dictates a radio station's success or failure. Our interest in different themes for different days led to what I'd consider a genuinely inquisitive general sound, and our focus on local institutions such as the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, and in the later weeks themes like inspiration and passion, led to some really interesting approaches to the pre-built features and shows we'd decided upon. It was this that led to a proper community feel in our output. Our purpose felt like we were there to let one half of the community know about the other half. showcase our unique talents, and more importantly, give us an insight into what we're truly capable of. I think my favourite part of this whole project was the feeling that everything we made, everything we accomplished, was ours. Just for us.